On a cold, rain-soaked night in Seattle, a broken man walked into a hospital carrying nothing but fear and a past the world had erased. Security froze. Doctors backed away. And then, the quiet maintenance worker stepped forward with an old German shepherd at his side. No badge, no weapon, just a voice that remembered war and a heart that refused to let another soul disappear. One wrong move could have turned this place into a tragedy. Instead, it became something no one expected. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle never really slept. It only sank into a deeper kind of listening. On nights like this, when the rain came down, not in sheets but in endless needles, the city felt less like a place and more like a living organism breathing through concrete and steel. The streets glistened under amber streetlights, reflections stretching and breaking beneath passing tires. Wind rolled in from Elliott Bay, cold and damp, slipping through jackets and settling into bones with the patience of something that knew it would win eventually. Harborview Medical Center rose from the hill like a fortress that had learned to look tired. Its windows burned white against the dark, a beacon for the broken, the bleeding, and the desperate. Ambulances came and went, their sirens muted by rain, while inside, fluorescent lights hummed with a fatigue known only to those who worked the night shift. Ethan Crowley arrived every night at exactly 9:47 p.m. He never clocked in early. He never arrived late. He moved through the employee entrance with the quiet certainty of a man who measured time by habit rather than clocks. Ethan was tall, 6'3", maybe more, broad-shouldered without appearing bulky. His frame lean in the way that suggested strength built for endurance, not display. His hair was dark brown, kept short not out of fashion, but out of preference, the kind of cut that didn't invite questions. A trimmed beard framed his jaw, not enough to hide the hard angles of his face, just enough to soften them for civilians. There was a narrow scar along his right cheekbone, pale and clean, the sort that came from sharp metal rather than accident. Most people assumed it was from a childhood fall or a careless shave. Ethan never corrected them. His eyes were what unsettled people, though few could articulate why. Gray, steady, always moving, not darting, not nervous, but tracking. Corners, reflections, exits. He looked at spaces the way other men looked at faces. When someone spoke to him, Ethan listened fully, but it always felt as if part of him remained elsewhere, guarding something unseen. He wore the same uniform every shift. Navy maintenance jacket, steel-toed boots polished just enough to suggest discipline, not pride. His ID badge simply read, E. Crowley, Facilities, no middle initial, no title. He liked it that way. At his side walked Rex. The German shepherd was old by working standards, somewhere between 10 and 11, though no one knew for sure. His coat was a deep sable, dark along the back, with lighter tan bleeding through the legs and chest. His muzzle had begun to gray, especially around the lips, and his left ear bore a jagged notch, a souvenir from a life before Harborview. Rex moved with the calm authority of a creature that no longer needed to prove anything. His gait was measured, joints stiff in the mornings, but loosening once he got moving. His eyes were amber and intelligent, and unlike most dogs, they did not search for approval. They assessed. Rex wore a plain leather collar, no patches, no insignia. Just a name tag, worn smooth from years of use. Most of the hospital staff knew Ethan as the quiet maintenance guy with the dog. The administration technically didn't allow animals on site, but exceptions had been made. Rex was registered as a therapy animal for veterans, though he rarely did formal visits anymore. Truthfully, no one had pushed the issue hard enough to remove him. Rex was unobtrusive. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He lay in corners, beneath desks, beside walls, as if he understood the geometry of safety better than most humans. Ethan and Rex made their first round through the emergency department without drawing attention. Ethan checked hinges on the ambulance bay doors, tested a faulty motion sensor near radiology, and adjusted a loose ceiling tile that had been reported 3 nights in a row. He worked efficiently, hands steady, movements economical. When a gurney rattled past too fast, he stepped aside instinctively, placing himself between Rex and the chaos without breaking stride. At the nurse's station, Sarah Whitman noticed him for the first time that night. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with the posture of someone who had learned to stand for long hours without complaint. Her blonde hair was pulled into a low bun, streaked with premature gray, not from neglect, but from genetics and stress. She had a narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that carried both warmth and exhaustion in equal measure. Sarah had been an ER nurse for nearly 20 years. Divorce had taught her patience. Trauma had taught her humor. What she had not learned was how to ignore things that didn't add up. She sipped lukewarm coffee and watched Ethan tighten a bolt beneath a supply cart. "He's quiet tonight," she said to no one in particular. "Isn't he always?" replied a younger nurse without looking up from a chart. Sarah nodded but kept watching. Ethan crouched, tested the bolt again, then gave Rex a subtle hand signal, 2 fingers down. Rex shifted position immediately, lying parallel to the wall, head up, eyes scanning the hallway. No words, no fuss. Sarah frowned, just slightly. Across the department, Lila Monroe burst through the double doors with the energy of someone trying very hard not to be afraid. Lila was 26, average height, with a soft athletic build that suggested she jogged when stressed, which was often. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail that refused to stay neat past the first hour of any shift. She had expressive brown eyes and a habit of talking too fast when nervous, filling silence like it was something dangerous. "Tell me that was the last ambulance for at least 10 minutes, she said, breathless, skidding to a stop at the station. Sarah smiled thinly. "You're adorable when you're lying to yourself." Lila laughed, then noticed Rex. "Oh, hey, handsome?" She crouched instinctively, reaching out. Before her hand could touch him, Rex leaned back half an inch, eyes never leaving her face. Ethan looked up. "He doesn't like surprises." Lila froze, then straightened, embarrassed. "Sorry, He looks so calm." "He is," Ethan said, "when he needs to be." Something in the way he said it made Lila pause. She studied him more closely now, the broad shoulders, the stillness, the way his presence seemed to dampen the noise around him. "You're Crowley, right? Maintenance?" Ethan nodded. "That's me. I'm Lila, ER, first month on nights." She grinned, then added quickly, "I talk a lot when I'm tired, or scared. Or both." "Most people do," Ethan replied. Rex, apparently satisfied, sat beside Ethan, tail thumping once against the floor. Lila smiled despite herself. "Guess he approves." "He tolerates," Ethan corrected gently. The overhead speakers crackled with a routine announcement. Somewhere down the hall, a patient laughed too loudly at a joke no one else found funny. Rain lashed harder against the windows. Ethan finished his check and stood, stretching slightly. For just a moment, as he rolled his shoulders, a stiffness passed through him, a phantom ache that had nothing to do with age. Rex rose at the same time, synchronized without effort. Sarah watched them leave, a question forming she chose not to ask. Ethan headed toward the service corridor, where the lights were dimmer and the noise softened into echoes. Rex walked close, brushing Ethan's leg once, a habit that had never faded. Outside, the storm pressed in harder, wind rattling loose signage and forcing rain through the smallest cracks. Seattle howled, restless and alive. Ethan paused by a window overlooking the city. For a brief second, his reflection overlapped with the darkness beyond, 2 versions of the same man, one visible, one buried. "Easy night," someone said behind him. Ethan didn't turn. They rarely start loud. Rex's ears flicked forward, the city listened, and somewhere beyond the rain, something was already moving toward the light. Seattle did not announce its danger, it suggested it. The rain eased slightly after midnight, thinning from needles to mist, but the wind sharpened, threading itself through alleyways and hospital vents like a whisper that knew where to hide. Inside Harborview Medical Center, the emergency department settled into a fragile rhythm, monitors beeping, keyboards clicking, shoes squeaking on polished floors. The kind of calm that felt borrowed. Ethan Crowley felt it first in his shoulders, not pain, anticipation, a tightening he had learned to respect long before he learned to survive it. He paused near the service corridor, one hand resting lightly on the metal frame of a supply door, eyes unfocused. Rex stopped too, his body angling slightly toward the ambulance bay. The dog's tail went still. His ears did not flatten or perk. They adjusted minutely, like antennae recalibrating. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Yeah," he murmured. "I hear it." He didn't know what it was yet, only that the night had shifted. Down the hall, Lila Monroe wrestled with a gurney that refused to cooperate, its wheel catching on a seam in the floor. She was flush now, dark circles forming beneath her eyes, ponytail coming loose in rebellious strands. The ER had given her no grace period. Fear and competence were learning to coexist the hard way. "Of course," she muttered, shoving harder. "Die on me now." A hand appeared on the gurney rail, steady and sure. The wheel lifted just enough to clear the seam. "Thank you," Lila said automatically, then looked up. "Oh, you." Ethan released the rail. "Wheel's bent. I'll log it." She studied him again, the way people did when their instincts told them something didn't match the label. "You always fix things before they break?" "Sometimes," Ethan said. "Sometimes after." Rex padded closer, sniffed the gurney once, then lost interest. Lila smiled despite herself. "He really doesn't miss much, does he?" "No," Ethan replied. "He remembers." That answer lingered with her longer than she expected. Across the department, a new voice joined the night shift. Low, clipped, threaded with impatience. "I need that CT cleared, now." The man speaking was Dr. Malcolm Hargreave, trauma surgeon, late 40s, tall and sharply built, with a trimmed salt and pepper beard and a posture that radiated authority even when he stood still. His white coat hung perfectly on his frame, as if tailored rather than issued. Hargreave was known for two things: surgical brilliance and a temper sharpened by years of losing patients he believed should have lived. He spoke to machines gently, and to people like obstacles. "The scanner's tied up," Sarah Whitman replied evenly. 5 minutes." "I don't have 5. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "You do if you want clean images." Hargreaves' jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Compromise, not concession. Ethan watched the exchange from a distance, cataloging tone and posture the way other men cataloged faces. Hargreave carried his stress forward, shoulders squared, chin lifted, fight rather than flight. A man who had learned that control was the only currency that mattered. Rex's head turned suddenly toward the ambulance bay. The sound came then, not loud, not dramatic. The dull thud of something heavy meeting resistance. Once, twice. A pause. Then voices. Ethan straightened. "Is that—" Lila began. The overhead speaker crackled. "Security to ambulance bay. Security to ambulance bay." Hargreaves swore under his breath and moved. Sarah set her coffee down. Lila felt her pulse spike, fingers curling unconsciously. Ethan didn't run. He never did. He walked toward the bay with purpose, Rex half a step behind, body low and ready. The sliding doors at the entrance shuddered as something struck them from the outside, hard enough to rattle the frame. Through the rain-blurred glass, a figure loomed. The man was enormous, easily 6'6", shoulders like poured concrete beneath a soaked hoodie. His hair was long and dark, plastered to his face, and his beard was thick, untrimmed, wild. Blood streaked one sleeve, not flowing, already drying. His fist slammed against the glass again, leaving fogged handprints. "Open the door!" he roared. "Open it!" Security hesitated. 2 guards, one older, heavy-set, eyes wary, the other young, too thin for his vest, stood braced, batons ready but uncertain. Ethan's gaze went to the man's stance. Wide base, weight forward, not drunk, not random. Rex growled, not loud, not aggressive. A warning. The man's eyes snapped to the sound, locking onto the dog with startling clarity. For half a second, the fury cracked, replaced by confusion. Recognition, almost. "Dog," the man said hoarsely. "They sent a dog." Ethan stepped forward into the man's line of sight, careful not to escalate. "No one sent anything," he said, voice calm, carrying through the glass. "You're safe here." The man laughed, a broken sound. "Safe?" He drove his shoulder into the door again. The glass bowed inward, alarms shrieking now. Everything accelerated. Security rushed. Nurses scattered patients back. Hargreave barked orders. Lila found herself frozen, heart hammering, watching Ethan move closer instead of away. "Crowley!" Sarah shouted. "Get back!" Ethan didn't look at her. He raised one hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. A universal signal that predated language. "Listen to me," he said to the man beyond the door. "You're hurt. You need help." The man's breathing was ragged now, chest heaving. "They're coming," he muttered. "I can hear them." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." That was the wrong thing or the right one. The man faltered, eyes narrowing. "You do?" "Yes." Silence stretched, fragile as ice. Then the door gave way. The man burst through, knocking the younger guard aside like a child. The older guard raised his baton. The blow glanced off the man's shoulder, barely slowing him. Chaos erupted. Screams, shouts, the clatter of overturned equipment. Ethan moved. He didn't charge. He sidestepped, placing himself between the man and the cluster of nurses retreating down the hall. Rex lunged, not at the man's throat, but at his arm, teeth closing just enough to disrupt balance. The man howled, swinging wildly, catching Rex's flank. Rex yelped once, then repositioned, disciplined even in pain. "Rex!" Ethan snapped. The dog disengaged instantly, circling. Ethan met the man head-on now, hands up, stance grounded. "Hey," he said sharply, "eyes on me." The man's gaze snapped to him. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been where you are." That stopped him. For a heartbeat, the ER seemed to hold its breath. Sirens wailed outside. Footsteps thundered. Lila realized she was crying without knowing when it had started. Ethan didn't see any of it. All he saw was a man drowning on dry land. "Name," Ethan said firmly. The man swallowed. "Jonah." "Jonah," Ethan repeated. "You're not alone." Jonah's shoulders sagged, just a fraction. And then the night tilted, ready to fall. The emergency department did not explode into chaos all at once. It fractured. Sounds overlapped without order. The hiss of oxygen, a monitor shrieking its protest, shoes slipping on rainwater dragged in from outside. Somewhere a patient cried out in fear. Somewhere else a nurse swore under her breath. At the center of it all stood Ethan Crowley and Jonah, less than 10 feet apart, both men breathing hard for very different reasons. Jonah swayed, the fight draining out of him in the uneven waves. Up close, the man looked older than Ethan had first thought. Mid-40s, maybe late 40s. His beard was thick and unkempt, black shot through with gray, framing a face carved by years of sun and stress. His nose had been broken more than once. One eyebrow bore a pale seam where skin had split and healed poorly. His eyes, bloodshot, frantic, kept sliding away, as if the room itself were unreliable. His hoodie hung off him, stretched tight across a barrel chest that still carried the density of someone who had once trained hard, then stopped too suddenly. Ethan noticed the hands, big hands scarred, knuckles swollen and misshapen. Not bar fight damage, repetitive, old, the kind of hands that learned violence as a job. "Jonah," Ethan said again, grounding the name between them. "Stay with me." Jonah's jaw clenched. "They were behind me," he muttered. "I heard them in the tunnels." "There are no tunnels here," Ethan replied, careful not to contradict too sharply. "Just hallways." Rex circled wider now, his gait stiff but controlled despite the blow he'd taken. Blood darkened the fur along his left side, not pouring, but enough to matter. His ears flicked at every sound, eyes never leaving Jonah. The dog was 11 years old. His hips didn't forgive mistakes anymore, but discipline overrode discomfort. Rex had learned long ago that pain was information, not instruction. Lila hovered near a crash cart, fingers trembling as she fumbled with gauze. Her face had gone pale beneath her freckles, eyes too bright. She had never been this close to violence before, not the sudden animal kind that didn't follow protocol. She watched Ethan with a strange mix of terror and awe, trying to reconcile the quiet man she'd joked with minutes earlier and the one now standing like a barrier between disaster and the rest of the room. "Ethan," she called, voice thin. "Your dog, he's bleeding." "I know," Ethan said without looking away. "Get me saline and a towel, not yet." Jonah's head snapped toward her voice, muscles tensing again. "Who's that?" "A nurse," Ethan answered. "She's here to help." "No," Jonah barked, panic flaring. "They use nurses. They always do. Ethan took a slow step forward, closing the distance just enough to keep Jonah's focus on him. Look at me, not her. Jonah's breathing hitched, his eyes locked onto Ethan's face, searching it the way a man searches terrain for a landmark he remembers trusting. You don't talk like them, he said slowly. You don't smell like them. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Jonah, he said quietly, where were you before you got here? Jonah swallowed, his shoulders slumped as if the question itself had weight. On the bridge, Aurora Bridge. I thought if I stayed high enough, they couldn't come up behind me. That landed wrong. Ethan filed it away. Who's they? Jonah shook his head, frustrated. You know, the men who don't exist. Ethan nodded once. He did know. Before he could say more, Dr. Malcolm Hargreave pushed forward, irritation cutting through fear. Crowley, we need him restrained. Now. He's injured and volatile. Hargreave's face was tight, eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. His beard, so meticulously trimmed earlier, was damp with sweat now. He had spent a career wrestling death into submission with skill and arrogance, and situations like this, unpredictable, uncontrollable, offended him. Ethan didn't turn. Not yet. That wasn't a suggestion, Hargreave snapped. He assaulted security. He injured staff. And if you rush him, Ethan replied, voice still level, he'll hurt someone else. Or himself. Jonah flinched at Hargreave's tone, hands curling into fists again. Rex growled, deeper this time. A warning threaded with pain. Sarah Whitman stepped in before the moment snapped. She placed a hand lightly on Hargreave's arm. Malcolm, she said calmly, give him 60 seconds. Hargreave glared at her. You don't get to... I've watched this man fix 3 things tonight before they broke, Sarah cut in, including your temper. 60 seconds. Hargreave hesitated, then stepped back with a sharp exhale. Control, even borrowed, was still control. Ethan felt the shift. He lowered his hands slightly, signaling trust without surrender. Jonah, he said, do you remember the last place you felt safe? Jonah laughed bitterly. No. That's okay, Ethan said. Your body does. Jonah frowned, confused. What does that mean? It means you're reacting faster than you can think, Ethan explained. Your body's still in a place that hurt you. Jonah's fist trembled. I can't shut it off. I know, Ethan said. Neither could I. That cracked something open. Jonah stared at him, really stared this time. You? Ethan nodded once. A long time ago. Sirens wailed closer now. Police, EMTs, the world pressing in. Jonah sagged suddenly, exhaustion crashing down as adrenaline burned out. His knees buckled. Before he could hit the floor, Ethan caught him, guiding him down rather than letting him fall. Rex stepped in close, body pressed against Jonah's side, a solid, breathing weight. It's okay, Ethan murmured, lowering Jonah to a seated position. You're not alone right now. Jonah's head dropped forward. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he whispered. I just couldn't tell where I was anymore. I know, Ethan said. Lila rushed in then, towel and saline in hand. She knelt beside Rex, hands steadier now that she had something to do. Up close, Rex looked every bit his age, clouding in one eye, stiffness in his movements, but his presence radiated calm. Lila cleaned the wound gently, whispering apologies he didn't need. You're a good boy, she murmured. Rex flicked his gaze to Ethan, then back to her, allowing it. Security and police finally closed in, cautiously this time. Jonah didn't resist as cuffs were placed on him, tears streaking through grime on his face. Hargreave barked orders, regaining his footing. Sarah coordinated beds. The ER began stitching itself back together. Ethan sat on the floor beside Rex, one hand resting on the dog's broad head, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of breath. The adrenaline seeped out of him, leaving behind a familiar hollowness. Lila hovered nearby, voice quiet. You knew exactly what to say to him. Ethan didn't look up. No, he said. I just listened to what his body was already saying. Outside, the rain started again, heavier now. And somewhere deep inside Jonah, something old had been named, even if it hadn't been healed yet. By the time dawn began to thin the night, Harborview Medical Center had returned to its habitual noise, controlled, efficient, almost indifferent. The storm outside softened into a gray drizzle, the kind Seattle wore like a second skin. Inside, the ER smelled of antiseptic and wet concrete. What had happened hours earlier did not vanish. It settled. It took on paperwork, quiet conversations, and eyes that lingered a second too long. Jonah lay restrained in a curtained bay, not thrashing now, not shouting. Sedation had taken the sharp edges off his fear, leaving him hollowed out and exhausted. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, breaths shallow but steady. A bruise darkened his temple where he had gone down, and a faint tremor moved through his hands even in sleep, as if his body were still bracing for impact. He looked smaller lying there, gravity finally allowed to do its work. Ethan stood just outside the bay, arms folded loosely across his chest, gaze fixed not on Jonah but on the monitor, tracing quiet lines of life. He had not slept. He did not expect to. His face was composed, but the lines around his eyes had deepened, carving something older into his expression. Rex lay at his feet on a folded blanket, flank bandaged, breathing slow and even. The dog's age showed most clearly when he rested, stiff joints, the careful placement of paws, but his eyes remained alert, amber pools reflecting every movement in the room. A man approached down the corridor without hurry, shoes polished, steps measured. Detective Alan Mercer was in his mid-50s, lean to the point of austerity, with a face cut sharp by years of skepticism. His hair had gone silver early, cropped close to the scalp, and his beard followed suit, neatly trimmed, never indulgent. Mercer wore his suit like armor, the fabric unwrinkled despite the hour. He had the calm of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by chaos. He stopped a respectful distance from Ethan. Crowley? Ethan inclined his head. Detective? Mercer's eyes flicked to Rex, then back. Dog's all right? He will be, Ethan said. Mercer nodded. That man in there, he continued quietly, has no record that matches his fingerprints. Ethan didn't respond. No priors, no active warrants, no clean ID either, Mercer went on. It's like he stepped out of a fog. Some people do, Ethan said. Mercer studied him more closely now, the way he might study a witness who knew more than he was saying. You knew how to talk him down. I listened. Mercer snorted softly. That's not what I meant. He paused, then lowered his voice further. He used language from a decommissioned unit, obsolete call signs. I haven't heard that terminology since... He stopped himself, lips pressing thin. A long time. Ethan finally met his eyes. For a moment, two men measured each other across a shared understanding neither wanted to name. Mercer exhaled. We'll keep him here under observation. Psych evaluation in the morning. Good, Ethan said. Mercer hesitated, then added, Off the record, thank you. He'd be dead if this had gone another way. Ethan nodded once. Mercer turned and walked away, his footsteps dissolving into the hum of the hospital. From the nurse's station, Lila watched Ethan retreat toward the service corridor. She looked worse than she felt, mascara smudged beneath tired eyes, scrubs rumpled, hair escaping entirely now. She had changed twice since the incident, hands still faintly trembling when idle. Fear had burned out, leaving behind something sharper, curiosity edged with respect. Sarah Whitman joined her, arms crossed, posture relaxed in the way that came only after danger had passed. You're staring, Sarah observed. He's not what he says he is, Lila replied. Sarah smiled faintly. Neither are most people who survive long enough. Lila hesitated. Do you think he's dangerous? Sarah considered that. No, she said finally. I think he's careful. Down in the service level, Ethan unlocked a narrow office he used as a storage room. The space was small and windowless. Concrete walls bare save for a single corkboard, pinned with maintenance schedules and evacuation maps. He lowered himself into a chair that creaked under his weight, then rested his elbows on his knees, head bowed. Rex pushed himself up with a grunt and crossed the room to press his head into Ethan's thigh. You did good, Ethan murmured, fingers finding familiar fur. I shouldn't have let you get hit. Rex's tail thumped once, slow and forgiving. A knock sounded on the metal door. Ethan straightened. A woman stepped in, adjusting a tablet under her arm. Her name badge read, Mara Keene, Social Work. Mara was in her early 30s, average height, with a sturdy build that spoke of practicality rather than neglect. Her dark hair was cut blunt at the jaw, her eyes sharp and observant behind rectangular frames. She dressed plainly, favoring function over fashion, and moved with the directness of someone used to asking difficult questions. "Mr. Crowley," she said, tone professional but not cold. "I'm assigned to Jonah." Ethan gestured to the chair opposite him. "Have a seat." She glanced at Rex, then sat. "I've reviewed what we have, which isn't much." "Usually isn't," Ethan replied. Mara tapped her tablet. "He shows classic signs of combat-related PTSD, severe dissociation, hypervigilance, likely untreated for years." She looked up. "He responded to you." "Temporarily." "That's more than he's responded to anyone else," she said. "I was hoping you could tell me why." Ethan leaned back, chair protesting softly. "Because I didn't ask him to explain. I asked him to stay." Mara nodded slowly. "He mentioned tunnels, bridges, men who don't exist. Black Ops imagery," Ethan said. "The mind filling gaps with something it can fight. You sound like you've studied this." Ethan's mouth twitched, humorless. "I lived it." Silence stretched. Mara didn't rush it. Finally, she said, "He's afraid of being taken." "So am I," Ethan answered before he could stop himself. Mara's eyes sharpened. "Taken where?" Ethan shook his head. "That's not his fear to carry, or mine." Mara considered him, then closed her tablet. "I'll recommend inpatient treatment, extended. He needs stability." "Thank you." She stood. "For what it's worth," she added, "whatever you did tonight, it mattered." After she left, Ethan remained seated, staring at nothing. Memories crept in uninvited. Heat, dust, radio static cutting out mid-sentence. The weight of responsibility that never quite lifted. Rex whined softly, sensing the shift. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "Me too." Later, as the morning staff filtered in and night faded into routine, Ethan signed out and clipped Rex's leash in place. They exited through the employee door into damp gray light. Seattle looked washed thin, streets steaming faintly as if exhaling. At the top of the hill, Ethan paused, glancing back once at the hospital. Somewhere inside, Jonah slept under watchful eyes. Somewhere else, questions waited. Rex nudged his leg, impatient. "Yeah," Ethan said, turning away. "Let's go." The city swallowed them whole. Seattle woke slowly, like a man reluctant to open his eyes after a bad dream. The rain thinned into a pale drizzle that smeared the morning light into something flat and metallic. From the hill above Harborview, the city looked harmless enough. Coffee shops opening, buses hissing to a stop, joggers pretending the cold didn't bite. Ethan Crowley knew better. Cities remembered things. They just hid them under routine. He and Rex moved through the neighborhood streets toward Ethan's apartment, a narrow walk-up tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a Vietnamese bakery that smelled faintly of yeast and sugar, even at dawn. Rex walked stiffly, favoring his bandaged side, but he refused to slow. 11 years old, scarred, and stubborn. Age had dulled his speed, not his will. Ethan adjusted the leash without comment, matching the dog's pace. Inside the apartment, the space was spared to the point of austerity. One couch, one chair, a small table near the window. No photographs, no souvenirs. The walls were clean, unmarked, as if Ethan rented not just the room, but the absence of history. He filled a bowl with water for Rex, added food he softened with warm broth, then stripped off his jacket and sat heavily in the chair. The silence pressed in. Rex finished eating and crossed the room, placing his head on Ethan's knee. The dog's amber eyes were clouded with age, but the focus behind them remained sharp. Ethan rested a hand on Rex's head, thumb brushing the notch in the ear. "I know," he murmured. "I felt it too." Sleep came in fragments. When Ethan finally woke, it was to his phone vibrating on the table, an unfamiliar number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Crowley," he said. "This is Mara Keene," came the voice on the other end. Practical, measured. "I'm sorry to call so soon, but Jonah asked for you." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Is he stable?" "As stable as he gets," Mara replied. "He's lucid, scared. He says there are things he won't say to anyone else." There it was, the weight shifting, invisible but undeniable. "I'm not his family," Ethan said. "No," Mara agreed. "But you're the only constant he's responded to." Ethan looked at Rex, who had lifted his head at the sound of Mara's voice. The dog's tail thumped once, soft against the floor. "I'll come by," Ethan said. "No promises." Back at Harborview, the daylight revealed what the night had blurred. Scratches on walls, a cracked monitor hastily replaced. The ER moved on because it had to. Ethan signed in quietly and followed Mara down a corridor toward the psych wing. Jonah sat upright in his bed, hands folded in his lap. Clean scrubs replaced the soaked hoodie. His hair had been washed, curling slightly at the ends, and his beard trimmed just enough to look intentional rather than feral. Without the adrenaline, he looked tired, hollowed out. The lines in his face deepened when he saw Ethan. "You came," Jonah said. "For now," Ethan replied. Mara lingered in the doorway, then withdrew, leaving them alone. Jonah's eyes flicked to the bandage on Rex's side. "Dog okay?" "He will be." Jonah nodded, shame creeping into his expression. "Didn't mean to hurt him." "I know." Silence stretched. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded. "They asked me my name again," Jonah said finally. "My real one." "And?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "I don't know which one that is anymore." Ethan sat in the chair beside the bed, posture relaxed but alert. "Tell me about the bridge," Jonah swallowed. "Aurora Bridge. I used to run there when my head got loud, high enough that the city felt small. I thought if I stayed moving, they couldn't catch up." "Who?" Ethan asked gently, Jonah's hands clenched. "The men who signed the papers, the ones who erased us." Ethan felt something old stir. "What unit?" Jonah hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It doesn't exist anymore." "That's not an answer," Ethan said. Jonah looked up sharply, anger flaring, then faltering. "Task Group Lancer," he said at last. "We were attached, then cut loose. They called it an experiment." Ethan went very still. Lancer. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. A joint task force. Off books. No flags, no acknowledgments. He remembered the briefing rooms that never stayed the same place twice. The missions that never made sense until it was too late. "You were extraction," Jonah continued, voice shaking now. "We went in to secure an asset. Civilians caught in the middle. Orders changed halfway through. We pulled back without half the team. They said it was necessary." Rex shifted, sensing the change in Ethan's breathing. "They told us to forget," Jonah said. "They said it would be easier." Ethan exhaled slowly. "It's never easier." Jonah studied him. "You were there." "Yes," Ethan said. "Different call sign, same lie." The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. A knock interrupted them. Detective Alan Mercer stepped inside, his suit jacket draped over one arm, sleeves rolled up. He looked more human in daylight, lines of fatigue softening his sharp edges. "Am I interrupting?" Mercer asked. "Depends," Ethan replied. "On what you want." Mercer smiled thinly. "Straight answers." He glanced at Jonah. "Your prints finally match something, not a crime, a casualty list." Jonah's face drained of color. Mercer continued, voice low. "Officially, you died 8 years ago in a training accident overseas. Unofficially," he trailed off, then met Ethan's eyes. "Someone went to great lengths to make sure you stayed dead." Jonah laughed softly, broken. "Guess they forgot to finish the job." Mercer's gaze hardened. "That's what worries me." After Mercer left, the room felt smaller. Jonah stared at the wall, jaw clenched. "They'll come," he said. "They always do when ghosts get loud." Ethan stood. "Then we make sure they don't find you alone." Jonah looked at him, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "Why?" Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I should have done it the first time." Outside the hospital, clouds thickened again, the sky lowering like a warning. Some names were buried for a reason. Others refused to stay that way. Seattle changed its mood by the hour. By afternoon, the drizzle had thickened again, clouds lowering until the city felt compressed, as if something heavy were being pressed down from above. From the upper floors of Harborview, the skyline looked unfinished, buildings half swallowed by fog, cranes frozen mid-reach. It was the kind of day that made people hurry without knowing why. Ethan Crowley felt it as soon as he stepped back into the hospital. Not urgency, surveillance. He moved through the corridor at an unremarkable pace, maintenance badge visible, posture loose. Rex walked beside him, head lower than usual, age and injury slowing him just enough to be noticeable. The bandage along his flank was clean, though the dog favored that side, muscles compensating the way they always had. Rex was 11, well past his prime, but the habits of vigilance had been etched too deeply to fade. His ears tracked footsteps long before Ethan heard them. They weren't alone. Ethan caught his reflection in a glass partition. Another man behind him, just far enough back to look coincidental. Broad shoulders, military posture, poorly disguised beneath a civilian jacket. Dark beard trimmed short. Hair cut to regulation length, out of habit, not necessity. The man's eyes never quite stopped moving. Ethan turned a corner and slowed, pretending to check a wall panel. Rex stopped with him. The footsteps behind them halted as well. "Crowley," a voice said quietly. Ethan straightened and turned. The man stepped forward into full view, mid-40s, 6 feet even, solid, not bulky, but dense in the way men became when they trained hard and never quite stopped. His beard was dark with strands of iron gray, jawline sharp beneath it, cheekbones pronounced. A faint scar cut through his left eyebrow, pulling it slightly downward and giving his expression a permanent edge. His eyes were hazel, alert, calculating, but not unkind. "Lucas Hale," the man said, extending a hand. "We served together. Once." Ethan did not take the hand. "Not under that name." Hale smiled faintly, withdrawing his hand without offense. "No, I suppose not." His voice carried the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. "I work with veterans now, consulting, outreach." "Funny place to recruit," Ethan said. Hale's gaze flicked to Rex. "Still running with the same dog." "He runs with me," Ethan replied. "Why are you here?" Hale leaned back against the wall, casual. "Word travels. When one of us shows up on a hospital intake with no paper trail, people notice." "People?" Ethan asked. "The ones who clean up," Hale said lightly. "And the ones who try to stop them." Rex growled, low and controlled. Hale raised his hands slightly, palms open. "Easy, I'm not your enemy." "You're in my way," Ethan said. Hale studied him for a long moment. "You always were blunt." He sighed. "Jonah isn't safe here. He's under medical supervision." Hale shook his head. "That won't matter. Lancer was buried for a reason. Anyone connected to it who surfaces becomes a liability." "And you?" Ethan asked. "What did you become?" Hale's smile faded. "Someone who learned too late that silence isn't the same as survival." Before Ethan could respond, Mara Keene appeared at the end of the hall, tablet clutched to her chest. She slowed when she saw Hale, assessing him with professional caution. "Mr. Crowley," she said, nodding to Ethan, then glanced at Hale. "Is there a problem?" "No," Hale said smoothly. "Just an old acquaintance." Mara's eyes lingered on him a second longer than polite. "Visiting hours for psych are restricted." "I'll be brief," Hale replied. Ethan cut in. "You're done here." Hale met his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, regret. "You're going to need help," Hale said quietly, "and you're running out of time." With that, he stepped away, footsteps fading down the corridor, swallowed by hospital noise. Mara exhaled slowly. "Do I want to know?" "Not yet," Ethan said. She frowned but nodded. Jonah's agitation spiked earlier. He asked if anyone had come looking for him. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did anyone?" Mara hesitated. "Two men in suits spoke with administration, said they were from a federal oversight office. No badges shown. They left before security could verify." That confirmed it. Ethan moved without hesitation. "I need access to Jonah, now." Inside Jonah's room, the air felt heavier. Jonah sat on the edge of the bed, foot tapping, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He looked up sharply when Ethan entered. "They came," Jonah said. "Didn't they?" "Not to you," Ethan replied. "Not yet." Jonah laughed bitterly. "They always send someone first, someone who remembers your name." Ethan sat across from him. "Do you remember Hale?" Jonah's face hardened. "Lucas?" He spat the name like a curse. "He walked away." "He survived," Ethan corrected. "Different choice." Jonah shook his head. "There are no different choices, just different lies." Rex lay down between them, a quiet anchor. Jonah's gaze dropped to the dog. "He's old. So am I," Ethan said. Jonah's mouth twitched despite himself. "They won't stop," he said, voice low. "Lancer wasn't a mistake. It was a test. We were the control group." "And the loose ends," Ethan added. A sharp knock interrupted them. Detective Alan Mercer stepped in, his expression grim. "You need to move him," Mercer said without preamble. "Now." Ethan stood. "On whose authority?" "Mine," Mercer replied, "and whatever shred of conscience is left in the system." He lowered his voice. "Someone accessed sealed casualty files this morning. That doesn't happen unless someone high up wants them reopened, or erased properly." Jonah's breathing quickened. "I told you." Mercer met Ethan's gaze. "I can buy you a few hours. After that, I can't pretend I didn't see anything." Ethan nodded. "That's enough." Mara stepped closer, confusion clear on her face. "Where would you even take him?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He thought of a place north of the city, buried in trees and silence. A training site once. Abandoned now. Forgotten, like everything else meant to disappear. "Somewhere that remembers us differently," he said. Rex pushed himself to his feet, tail wagging once, as if he approved of movement over waiting. Jonah looked at Ethan, fear and resolve colliding. "If we go," he said, "there's no coming back." Ethan held his gaze. "We were never really back." Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the sound. The ghosts had been named. Now they were being called. They did not leave Seattle dramatically. No sirens, no gunfire, just timing. Ethan chose the hour when the city changed shifts, when traffic thinned not because it was late, but because it was too early. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the roads dark and slick, the air smelling faintly of salt and wet leaves. He drove an aging gray pickup that blended perfectly into the background of Pacific Northwest life. Nothing about it invited memory. That was the point. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, hood pulled low, shoulders tense. He had changed into borrowed clothes, plain jeans, a flannel shirt that hung loose on his broad frame, boots half a size too big. Without restraints or hospital lights, he looked less like a threat and more like a man who hadn't slept properly in years. His beard was still rough despite trimming. His jaw clenched as if he expected the road itself to betray him. Rex occupied the back seat, lying on a thick blanket. He shifted occasionally, careful with his injured side, but his eyes remained open, tracking headlights, reflections, movement. 11 years old, scarred, slower, but still a working dog in spirit. His coat caught the low light, sable fur streaked with gray, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He was tired, not done. They crossed the city limits without ceremony. The highway north narrowed quickly, lanes giving way to winding roads that climbed through dense stands of fir and cedar. Cell service dropped to one bar, then none. Fog clung to the treetops, drifting lower as they climbed, swallowing sound. The forest closed in, ancient and indifferent. Jonah broke the silence first. "You sure this place is still there?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "It doesn't need to be." "That's comforting," Jonah muttered. Ethan almost smiled. After 40 minutes, he turned off the main road onto a barely marked access path, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Branches brushed the sides of the truck, leaving thin scratches that caught the light like scars. The road ended abruptly at a rusted chain pulled aside long ago. Beyond it stood the remains of a compound. It had once been a training site, remote, unlisted, useful precisely because no one cared enough to remember it. Now it was just weathered buildings and silence. A squat concrete structure half sunk into the earth. A long shed with a collapsed roof. A faded sign bolted to a fence, lettering peeled and unreadable. Jonah stared. "This is where you brought me?" "This is where they taught us to disappear," Ethan replied. They parked and stepped out. The air was colder here, sharper. The forest pressed close, branches knitting overhead. Light filtered into narrow beams. Rex hopped down carefully, favoring his side but refusing help. He sniffed the air, then the ground, tail lifting slightly, not wagging but loosening. Recognition. "You've been here before," Jonah said, noticing. "Yes," Ethan answered. "So has he." They moved toward the concrete building. Inside, the smell of damp stone and old oil lingered. Dust coated everything in a fine gray film. Ethan flicked on a lantern, its glow cutting a clean circle through the dark. Jonah walked slowly, eyes scanning corners, ceiling, exits. "I don't like places that feel abandoned," he said. "Too quiet." "Quiet isn't empty," Ethan replied. "It just doesn't advertise." They settled in the main room, clearing space, setting down packs. Ethan moved with familiarity, as if muscle memory guided him. He checked doors, tested locks that barely functioned, took inventory of what remained. A cracked mirror, old bunks, a metal cabinet with nothing inside but dust. Rex circled once, then lowered himself near the wall, back to stone, facing the entrance. Guard position. His breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed sharp. "You trust him more than people," Jonah observed. Ethan shrugged. "He's honest about what he is." Jonah snorted quietly. "Must be nice." Hours passed without incident. They ate sparingly, spoke little, the forest held. As dusk settled, Ethan stepped outside to scan the perimeter. The sky above the trees had turned the color of bruised steel. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called once, then fell silent. That was when Ethan saw the tracks. Fresh. Boot prints where there shouldn't have been any. Too deliberate to be hikers. Too recent to ignore. He crouched, fingers brushing the damp soil. Vibram soles, military issue, at least 2 sets. They weren't alone anymore. Ethan returned inside. "We have company." Jonah was on his feet instantly, tension snapping back into his posture. "How long?" "Hours," Ethan said. "Maybe less." Rex rose with a grunt, moving to Ethan's side without command. Jonah's jaw tightened. "They found us fast." "They didn't," Ethan corrected. "They guessed." A sound cut through the forest, an engine idling, far off, then silence. Ethan moved to the back of the structure. Peering through a narrow slit, 2 figures emerged between the trees, moving cautiously. Both men, both armed. The first was tall and lean, movement smooth and economical. Late 30s, clean-shaven, sharp cheekbones, eyes cold and focused. The kind of man who treated violence like a transaction. The second was broader, heavier, beard thick and dark, shoulders slightly hunched from old injuries. His movements were slower, but his grip on his weapon was relaxed, confident. "Who are they?" Jonah whispered. "Cleaners," Ethan replied. "Different employer this time." The lean man spoke quietly. "We know you're here." His voice carried easily through the trees, calm, controlled. Ethan stepped out into view, hands visible but empty. Rex remained just behind him, body tense. "You're trespassing," Ethan said evenly. The bearded man chuckled. "Funny, we were going to say the same." The lean man studied Ethan. "Crowley," he said. "You're harder to find than your file suggests." "And yet," Ethan replied, "here you are." The man nodded. "We don't want a mess, just the asset." Jonah stiffened behind Ethan. Ethan shook his head. "He's not an asset." The bearded man shifted his weight. "That's where you're wrong." Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Rex growled low, hackles lifting just enough to be noticed. The lean man sighed. "You always did complicate things." Ethan met his gaze. "You always did follow orders." That landed. A flicker of something passed through the man's eyes. Recognition, maybe regret. A branch snapped somewhere to the side. The bearded man turned too slowly. Rex launched. Age slowed him, but timing did not. He hit the man's legs, weight slamming into knees already compromised by old injuries. The man went down with a grunt, weapon clattering. Ethan moved at the same moment, closing distance on the lean man, knocking his rifle aside and driving him back into the tree line. Jonah froze for half a second, then moved. Years of training resurfaced, imperfect but present. He tackled the bearded man as he struggled to rise, fists clumsy but furious. The fight was brief, brutal, uneven. When it ended, both men lay restrained, breathing hard, bloodied but alive. Ethan stood over them, chest heaving slightly. "You should have stayed ghosts," the lean man muttered. Ethan looked at Jonah, then at Rex, who stood panting, eyes bright, tail stiff with adrenaline. "No," Ethan said. "We tried that. It didn't work." The forest closed in again, quiet as ever. But this time, it had witnesses. Morning arrived without permission. It slid through the trees in thin, pale bands, touching bark, stone, and the quiet aftermath of violence with equal indifference. Mist clung low to the ground, turning the forest into something half-remembered, half-forgiven. The abandoned compound no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a crossroads. Ethan Crowley stood at the edge of the clearing, coffee steaming in a battered metal mug he had found buried in a crate. The smell was weak, burned, but familiar. He hadn't slept. He hadn't needed to. The night had stripped away whatever illusions remained. What was left was clarity. Behind him, Jonah sat on a fallen log, shoulders slumped, elbows braced on his knees. His knuckles were scraped raw, dried blood dark against pale skin. He looked exhausted in the way only men who had stopped running felt, like the weight of vigilance had finally shifted somewhere else. His beard was uneven again, shadowed with gray, but his eyes were clearer than Ethan had ever seen them. Rex lay stretched out between them, head on his paws, flank rising and falling slowly. The bandage along his side had been replaced, cleaner now, tighter. 11 years old, scarred, tired, but alive. His tail thumped once when Ethan turned, a lazy acknowledgement, not a demand. The two men they had restrained sat several yards away, wrists bound, backs against a tree. The lean one, sharp-eyed, precise, stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The bearded one shifted uncomfortably, wincing when his knee protested. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The fight had answered enough. Jonah broke the silence. They won't stop just because these two didn't come back. Ethan nodded. No. So what now? Jonah asked. There was no panic in his voice, just the question. Ethan took a sip of coffee, grimaced, then lowered the mug. Now we make noise. Jonah snorted softly. That's new? For me too, Ethan said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered flash drive. Jonah's eyes narrowed. What's that? A copy, Ethan replied. Of things that were never meant to be copied. Jonah stared. You had this the whole time? Yes. And you waited until now? Ethan met his gaze. Because silence keeps you alive, until it doesn't. The forest shifted with sound. Engines, distant but approaching. Not aggressive, not cautious, measured. Jonah tensed. More of them? Ethan shook his head. No. 2 vehicles emerged from the trees along the access road. One unmarked SUV. One older state police cruiser. Both stopped at a respectful distance. Detective Alan Mercer stepped out first, jacket slung over one shoulder, tie abandoned entirely. He looked older in the morning light, lines around his eyes deepened, hair more silver than Ethan remembered, but his posture was steady. Resolved. From the SUV emerged a woman Jonah didn't recognize. Early 50s, tall, straight-backed. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, iron gray without apology. Her suit was dark, perfectly pressed, worn like armor. Her face was sharp, high cheekbones, thin lips, eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions were made quietly and consequences were loud. This is where you ran to, she said, her voice cool, controlled. Predictable. Jonah stiffened. Who's that? Ethan didn't look away. That's Eleanor Price. The woman inclined her head slightly. Deputy Undersecretary, Oversight and Compliance. Jonah laughed once, harsh. That's a hell of a title. Eleanor's gaze slid to him. You're Jonah Reed, she said. Or what's left of that name. And you're the one who signed off, Jonah shot back. On Lancer. Eleanor didn't flinch. I signed off on a recommendation I was given. Then I spent years trying to bury the consequences. That's not the same as fixing it, Ethan said. No, Eleanor agreed. It isn't. Mercer stepped forward. I've contacted Internal Affairs, the Inspector General, and a few senators who don't like being lied to. He looked at Ethan. You gave me enough rope. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the flash drive in Ethan's hand. You intend to burn everything. I intend to stop running, Ethan replied. Silence fell. The forest held its breath again. Eleanor studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded once. Very well. Jonah blinked. That's it? You just agree? Eleanor's mouth tightened. No, I accept that this has outgrown me. She looked at the restrained men. They won't be missed, Mercer motioned to the cruiser. Two uniformed officers approached, professional, unhurried, taking custody of the men without comment. Eleanor turned back to Ethan. There will be hearings, statements, attempts to discredit you. I know, Ethan said. And you? She asked Jonah. You could disappear again. Jonah looked at Rex, then at Ethan. He shook his head. I'm tired of dying on paper. Eleanor studied him, then surprised them both by softening, just slightly. So am I. Hours later, the compound was empty again. Ethan, Jonah, and Rex stood alone in the clearing as sunlight finally broke through the clouds, warming the damp ground. The forest no longer felt hostile. It felt neutral, a place that didn't care who you had been. What happens to us? Jonah asked. Ethan thought of Harborview, of Lila's nervous smile, of Sarah's steady presence, of Mara's careful questions, of Rex aging one breath at a time. We go back, Ethan said, but not the same way. Months later, Seattle felt different. The rain still came, the city still listened, but something had shifted. Harborview Medical Center added a small, unassuming office near the psych wing. No plaque, no press release. Inside, men and women sat across from Ethan Crowley and talked about things they had never said aloud. Jonah Reed sat beside him, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking when it mattered. Rex lay between them, older now, slower, but still watching. He wore a new collar, simple, leather, a small tag engraved with one word, stayed. One afternoon, Lila paused at the doorway, smiling softly. He's getting gray. Ethan looked down at Rex. So are we. Rex lifted his head, tail thumping once. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something had finally come to rest. Not because the past was gone, but because it had been carried, together, into the light. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes he sends them quietly, in the form of a tired man who refuses to walk away, a loyal dog who stays despite the pain, or a second chance given when the world says it's too late. In our everyday lives, we pass by people who look ordinary, broken, or invisible, but God sees what we cannot. He sees the strength hiding behind silence, the courage growing in wounded hearts, and the love that refuses to leave anyone behind. If this story touched you, let it remind you of this. No one is forgotten, no pain is unseen, and no darkness is too deep for God's light to reach. If you believe in quiet miracles, please share this story with someone who needs hope today. If you believe kindness still matters, leave a comment and tell us what part moved you most. And if you want more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of God's presence in everyday lives, subscribe to the channel now. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you wherever you are watching from. And may no soul, child, animal, or human ever have to face fear alone. Amen.